Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to TechEd Day 3. Glad to see all of you here this morning, particularly if you were out partying last night. I hope you enjoyed the football and all the other activities. My name's Paul Bromley. I work for Microsoft Consulting Services in the UK. English is my first language. I tend to speak slightly fast, so I know for a lot of you, English is not your first language. If I am speaking too fast and you don't understand something, please just raise your hand and ask me to repeat it. I know it's difficult when we come to these sorts of conferences. I've worked for Microsoft for about 12 years. I've been in IT about 30-odd years. I've seen a lot of disasters in my time. I've caused some of them. Yeah, I will show you one. And over the last couple of years where I've been dealing with Lync, I've noticed there has been a tendency for people not to really understand some of the capabilities within Lync and to understand what you can and can't do, what works, what doesn't work, what's appropriate in a different situation. I also know when I talk to customers, they often talk about disaster recovery, when what they actually mean is a DR site. Two totally different things, as you'll see as we go through. And they talk about availability, not really understanding what their real requirements are. So I'm going to talk initially about some terminology. We ban these words around. What do I mean by them? I'm going to talk about how we determine some of our requirements. Think about some of the things we need to consider when we're looking at high availability, resiliency and disaster recovery. Try and look a little bit about the technology, understand some disaster effects and what the Lync components do and don't do. And then look at how you can develop a plan. I've got a backup plan. You'll see as we go through. And I will actually show you some recovery and failover and things like that. So terminology. I don't know if you, like me, I wanted to know what these words meant. I went to Bing, did some searching, looked at Wikipedia, Business Dictionary, and of course, being English, I looked at the Oxford English Dictionary. And I found a lot of different definitions. I mean, I even found a definition of resiliency which says, is the ability of a material to absorb energy when it's deformed elastically and released upon energy means nothing to what we're talking about. Yeah? I did find one good one on resiliency and specifically around networks, the ability to provide and maintain an acceptable level of service. That's an important word, acceptable, in the face of faults and challenges of normal operation. So, what do I mean? Well, when I talk about high availability, it's really about the level of redundancy that we apply to the system. It's about keeping the system up and running in its current operation. Its focus is very much on service availability. And generally that's measured in terms of percentages of availability, be that 3 nines, 4 nines, 5 nines, and I'll talk about that a bit later. But it's about keeping the service up and running. It's a full service. Resiliency, on the other hand, is really the ability to provide a subset of that service. What is acceptable in terms of a significant disaster or failure. So whereas high availability is trying to deal with a single point of failure generally, this is talking about, well, I've got a significant failure. It may be a major network outage, maybe a power failure that's knocked out a data center. What's the minimum level of service that I need to provide in those circumstances? And that's what I mean by resiliency. It's about maintaining some, but not all features. When we look at disaster recovery, that's about the restoration of service. Right? You've had a major outage for whatever reason, and you want to restore the service. Now, that restoration may mean that you lose some data. So there is an impact of doing that. And that's generally measured in terms of RPO and RTO, recovery point objective and recovery time objective. To what point are you going to recover, and how long have you got to do it? So when we look at high availability, people talk about 4 nines availability or 5 nines availability. What does it actually mean? Most people actually don't know. If you talk to the customer, they haven't got a clue. They just band it about something they think they need. It also depends on how you're going to measure it, over what time. As you can see here, An hour's outage can either mean 4 nines availability, 3 nines availability, or 99.5 availability, depending whether you're measuring over a year, a month, or a week. Yeah? So you've got to think about what you're measuring that over. Now, in most cases, it's generally measured over a week, over a month, but that's not always the case. So you need to be very careful about these things. You know, 1 hour's downtime, what does it actually mean? And when you look at availability, does it include planned and unplanned? So are you allowed your monthly maintenance window or not? You know, how long does it take to fail over a SQL cluster? Does anybody know? Any guesses? It takes about 2 minutes if you're lucky. If you read some of the SQL documentation, they talk about things that affect failover of a cluster. How long does it take to reboot a server for your monthly maintenance batch? Oh, about 2 minutes. Yeah, you've got to think about some of these things when you start looking about, particularly if you start looking at 4 nines and 5 nines availability, it starts to matter. The cost of those additional lines, though, as you move up between 4 and 5, yeah, is exponential almost. You know, to move to the next 9 is quite costly. And this is where the difference between high availability and resiliency matter, because sometimes actually you don't need that for all services. So think about how it will be measured. Think about what is essential. Will resiliency be enough? So when we look at disasters, it's surprising we talk about DR sites. Only about 3% of disasters are what I call natural disasters, things like fire and flood, you know, earthquakes, those sorts of things. 32% are human error. A DR site is not going to help you for human error. I don't know if people, anybody here banks with NatWest in the UK and seen their outage this last week? Yeah? Human error. Hardware failure. Now that can be a number of combinations. It could be power failure. It could be, you know, hardware component in a server. It could be anything. Software failure. Bugs. You know, it's surprising when you start looking at disasters, and these are my percentages. If you search the internet, you'll find similar ones. Most of these disasters don't require you to go to a DR site. But what your customer will be thinking about is DR site, DR site. It's not the thing that's going to solve all your problems. You need to think about all the other elements. So human error. Yes, I've done it. Usually about midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. This is what I did for one of my customers. I'm not going to believe I'm going to show you this. One of my customers was kind enough to let me into their system. Oh, by the way, the reason it says it's not genuine, it is. Would you believe today of all days was a time it wanted to relicense itself? I haven't connected to my KMS server for about 3 months. But don't worry about it. So, in my case, I had a customer, and their problem was I'd implemented a new dial plan. And they had quite a complex dial plan. I've only put a little bit on my system here. One of the problems they had was they said, well, we can't phone Dublin. So I did the sensible thing. I went to the dial plan, and I actually went to the Dublin thing, and I thought, well, what's the problem with phoning Dublin? So if you're used to it, you think, well, I'll just go and test the number. So I tested the short dial. So any 8 short dial, 1, 2, and I thought, well, this is going to go correctly, isn't it? And as you can see, it doesn't translate correctly. I'd made a mistake in loading the dial plans. I'd done it in a script, and I'd missed the $1 off the end. So being a clever person, or perhaps not so clever, I thought, I know what I'll do. I will just quickly script and change that and add $1 to the end. So first thing I did was I went and got the normalization rules and just checked, you know, if you're using PowerShell, it's a wonderful tool, but it is a new tool we've given you to create loads of errors. Well, there's all my dial plans. Let's do it short way. So I can see all my dial plans. You can see $1s missing off the end of the translation. So, being a sensible person, I thought, well, that's okay. I can take that. And anybody knows anything about PowerShell? I'll put it into a variable. Very sensible thing to do. Make sure what you're changing is the thing you think you're changing. And then being rather clever at PowerShell, I thought, well, all I need to do is loop round that. And I wrote this. And everybody will spot the mistake as I go. Of course, that went away and did the right thing, didn't it? Oh, no, I've made a mistake. Oh, I missed. I missed the spaces out. Nope. Oh, it's the wrong top bracket at the end of this one. That's it. Nope. Just cut and paste it. Shouldn't try and type on Sage, really. Yeah. I'm glad everybody's got my scripts. There we go. That's what I did. And you've all spotted the mistake I made, which was mistyped translation. And the result was, we go up, that I wiped out all those lovely numbers I had in there. Yeah, I mistyped translation. That was deliberate in this. That's why I actually did it at customer, because at 1 o'clock in the morning, when you're typing away, it's easy to make a typo and easy to cause a problem. Now, being the good consultant I was, I had used a lovely feature that most people don't even realise is in the product. Before I started, I had exported my configuration. The lovely feature in here called export configuration. And I could just re-import my configuration. Right? So that export import, if you're starting playing with voice dial plans and the like, is critical. Do that before you start. It's one of the ways that you can do backup. Unfortunately, it's also one of the few bits that you can't automate. But back up your dial plan, back up your voice routing, export, and all I did was do a re-import. So, very, very easy with PowerShell cause problems. So what you back up and what you look after is very important, because a DR site isn't going to solve any human error. When we look at recovery requirements, when we talk about DR, I talked about RPO and RTO, recovery point and recovery time. As you get lower and lower in your recovery point and recovery time, so it gets more expensive. So from a recovery point of view, if you're talking about seconds, you tend to talk about synchronous replication. When you start to talk about minutes, you can talk about asynchronous replication. Talk about hours and days, it's periodic. You can go to take backup if you're talking about weeks. If you think about Lync, right? If you've got a disaster, some real big problem, what sort of recovery point do you actually need? In most organisations, for most of the data, you can tend to talk in hours, days. Because most of the data we're talking about is your contact list. How often does your contact list change? And what happens if you happen to have restored and missed somebody out? Will the user be able to recover that data from somewhere else? If you think about meeting content, how many of you load up meeting content before a meeting? Very few, yeah. There are a few. I deal with some organisations where, that is norm. If you deal with local government, where they have very structured meetings, uploading agendas and other things before the meeting is fairly common. Having said that, even if we lost that data, they're able to recover that from somewhere else. Yeah? So it is recoverable from other places often. The only other area that I see with recovery point issues is in some regulated industries where the archiving data is important. So you need to think about how that works and what you do about that and what compliance solution you need. When you look at recovery time, that does vary a lot, depending on how much you're using an environment and what key elements are for you. If you think about it, I've worked in IT for a long time. I said I've seen email become critical to DR processes. So email is the first thing to be recovered. You're going to start seeing information and presence become the same sort of thing, important in a DR scenario, where people need it as a method of communication. The other thing to consider when you look at recovery time is what else is going on. If you truly are doing a DR site and you're recovering to a DR site, it's not just Lync that is likely to be failing over. You may have 2 days, say, to do your recovery. But actually, when you think about the total number of servers that are failing over, you've mostly got about 2 hours. What's your window in that total process? So you need to think about those things when you look at this. How long can a business function without that application? Particularly when you start looking at conferencing, dial-in conferencing. As I said, these things are going to become important because all of a sudden, actually, we need an hourly conference or a daily conference during this process. You're providing that now. So, having determined to look at some of the requirements, let's look at some of the Lync components. This is my drawing. I've just drawn the main components. You've got a central site with a perimeter network, and you might have some branch sites. You might have various things on those branch sites. I'm going to drill down into each of these. So if you look at the pool itself, the objective of an enterprise pool is high availability, right? We have multiple front ends. So if one goes, the others will pick up the load. You have a hardware load balancer. Oh, is your hardware load balancer highly available or not? Do you care? How often are you passing that off to another team without thinking, what is the service they're providing with that? So is it a single load balancer or is it actually a high available pair? Your SQL database, is it a cluster or not? What's your cluster failover time likely to be? Your file share. The thing most people forget when they're planning Lync is the file share. You know, yes, it's generally provided in a data center, but what is its availability? You know, is it just a single server? Is it a SAN? Is it DFS? What's providing that high availability of the file share? So you need to think about each of the components. You may say, actually, well, actually, I'm doing DNS load balancing, the hardware load balancing, I'm just going to have a single one. What does that mean? Well, that means that if you lose that hardware load balancer, you can't join the meeting because the meeting joined. You know, you need to think about those things and think about what's impacted if you lose that component. So what happens? I wasn't going to demo this. It takes about 2 minutes, unfortunately. If you lose the SQL server, the server will carry on. The users will still be able to do some work. And they'll see this. Limited functionality is available due to an outage. So if you lose a SQL server, the front ends will carry on. They go into resiliency mode. I'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute when I look at the branch. But it's effectively exactly the same process. It becomes effectively a survivable branch appliance. It's just a registrar. When you look at your edge, you need to think about the components. So there's the edge servers and the reverse proxy. And how many of you draw diagrams like this with one reverse proxy? Yeah, I do it. You know? Well, hold it. As I said, every meeting joined is going through that reverse proxy. You can't join meetings if it fails. You've got potentially hardware load balancers. Or you may be using DNS load balancing. Choice. But if you're using hardware load balancers, again, what's the availability of those? What about the firewalls you're going through themselves? Does your customer have highly available firewalls or not? The reason I raise these is because it all costs money. Sometimes it's right not to have components duplicated. Sometimes, you need to duplicate them. And sometimes you need to think about how often is that component likely to fail that means I need to duplicate it. When we look at voice has a lot of components. There's the Exchange servers. What's your availability of those? What happens when you fail over to a DR site? Oh, your Exchange is almost certainly failing over at the same time as well. How's that all going to work? Your mediation servers. Are you homing them on the front ends or have you got separate ones? If you've got separate ones, do they need to be highly available? What about the PSTN gateways they go to? You've got choices. You can do multiple routes. Or you can have multiple gateways. There's a pro and con of that. So if I've got multiple routes, I might have multiple data centers. In Microsoft, we have data centers in Redmond, Dublin, and Singapore. Is it sensible for Dublin to fail over its backup voice route to Redmond? Maybe not. That's a lot of voice traffic, a lot of additional cost. But there again, I might also have voice routes as well as Dublin. We got a voice route in Reading in the UK. While I could fail over perhaps my voice route to Reading. So sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. And you need to balance that. The one that I particularly raise is dial-in conferencing. I'm currently sizing some dial-in conferencing for a customer. It's going to be quite large. And of course, with dial-in conferencing, what we're trying to do is make sure the dial-in conferencing number, the main one in the UK, comes into the data center because of the volume of traffic. We don't want it going over the WAN. And therefore, I want resiliency in that particular connection. If you've got a SIP trunk, in fact, in this case, it will be a SIP trunk, are you using session border controls on your end? Are they highly available? Have you got multiple SIP trunk routes? How's that going to fail over? So the survivable branch. So resiliency in voice, we've got the survivable branch appliance. There's also a thing called the survivable branch server. I'm not going to really cover that today. The point of that product, the survivor branch appliance, is the difference between registrar and user services. And when you look at voice resiliency, it's understanding those differences. So what happens in the branch appliance? We have registrar and routing. My endpoint, so my Lync client, my Lync phone, registers its existence, where it is. That's what the registrar service does. The survivor branch appliance also has a copy of the session management source, has a copy of the dial plan. So it knows that endpoint is logged on as me, and it knows what my dial plan is, so it can make those routes. The pool is providing user services. Presence. So when I change my presence status, that's done by user services. When I register, or when other people register for my presence updates, they do that against user services. So every time my presence changes, user services will send out updates to everybody who's registered. The pool's also providing conferencing. So if I want to do any conferencing, that's provided by user services. It's where the focus sits. It's what manages all the conferencing. Be that multi-party IM, multi-party audio, a web conference, doesn't matter. That's done by user services. Once you start understanding those differences, you understand what the survivable branch appliance does. And I said it's also what happens when the pool goes into resiliency mode when it loses the SQL server. It's doing basically registration and routing, because it needs the SQL database to be able to do conferencing and all the other things. It's recording that in the SQL database. So what happens? So in a simple scenario on the left-hand side, we've got two users, Bob and Alice, both in the same branch. Under normal operation, they will register with the branch appliance. If they want to make a phone call to each other, that goes through the branch appliance knows where each of them is, and it just gets routed and the media stays local. Nice and easy. In the middle, we've got a slightly different scenario. In this case, Alice is in the branch, but Bob's actually a user in the main site. In this case, as Alice registers with the branch appliance, Bob registers with the pool. When Alice wants to talk to Bob, Alice sends a message. The branch appliance says, oh, I know where Bob is. Bob's up on that server. I'll talk to that server. So it talks to the pool. Message goes to the pool. Pool talks to Bob. That's the signaling path. The media will still go direct between the two. If Alice wants to make a PSTN call, again, she'll send a message to the branch appliance. The branch appliance knows her dial plan, and the chances are the route's actually out through that branch appliance. It has a media gateway in there, and it will make the call straight out to the PSTN. In this case, the media will go to the branch appliance, usually directly to the media gateway on there, and out to PSTN. So that also happens in a normal environment. So what happens when we get certain outages? So if we get a WAN outage in the first case, well, with a WAN outage, there's no real impact to that voice call. Alice can still call Bob because they're both registered on that branch appliance. We're not making use of user services. The audio is still possible, but they can't do any conferencing. They won't see any presence. Okay? But they can still make a call. And as I said, when you look at high availability versus resiliency, what is essential? In the middle example, what happens is slightly different. Because Alice is down on the branch, Bob's up on the pool. When Alice tries to make a call to the branch, from the branch, she'll talk to the branch appliance. The branch appliance will say, I want to talk to the pool. I can't talk to the pool at the moment. The WAN's down. I've got no communication. If you've enabled it in your dial plan, we'll do what we call PSTN reroute. This is where what the branch appliance says, oh, all right, I'll use Bob's phone number instead. I'll make a PSTN call out through your normal route. That's important, you have the right routes. Out through your route, and then it will be received by the media gateway, assuming there is one, in the data center. This is where you might want some in the data center. So Alice can still call Bob. It is voice only. It's going over PSTN. But it means Bob and Alice can still communicate. They can still have a voice call. What happens, though, if we lose the survival branch appliance itself? Do you need duplicates or not? Debatable. Well, in this case, what happens is the pool is designated as a backup registrar. The pool will take over registration services. So Alice and Bob would then be registered with the pool. All their user services are on the pool, so they still get all their user services. Everything works. All that will happen is you will see that they'll try to log on, it will fail, and then it will reconnect to the pool. Go to the backup registrar. No loss of functionality, it all works. So you can lose that component. What's my experience? So if everything's working, I have a nice client that shows everything. If I start seeing features down, I get that red bar warning me that I've got limited functionality. Of course, what's going to happen the first time a user sees that, they're going to phone the help desk and say, what does it mean? So you need to make sure users are educated to know. What it means is you can just make calls at the moment. You can't do anything else. Yeah? Just a bit of a user education. On the right-hand side, I've listed some of the features when the WAN's down. What do you get? Well, you get inbound and outbound calls. I can have inter-site calls because of PSTN rerouting. I can hold, retrieve, transfer calls. I can deposit voicemails, potentially, depending where Exchange UM is. Or I can do a PSTN reroute to Exchange UM. Again, I can do voicemail retrieval in the same way. I can do call forwarding, simultaneous ring, all those sorts of things all work. I get call detail records. The branch appliance will still record CDRs. They just sit in MSMQ until such time as the server comes back to pick them up. Basically, anything two-party within the site will carry on. I can do audio conferencing. Because, again, I can do PSTN reroute and dial into a conference. What can't I do? Well, inter-site data. So inter-site between the branch and the main site, if the WAN's down, I can't do IM, application sharing. I can't do conferencing in terms of audio, video, web conferencing. I don't see any presence. Do not disturb based routing doesn't work because there's no state. I haven't got a do not disturb state. I can't modify my presence. I can't change my call forwarding settings. They will still apply, but I can't change them. That's because the pool knows what they are, but I can't communicate with the pool to change them. I won't see my contact list because that's provided by user services. Strange, you still see the odd person in the list. It's due to caching. Response groups and call park, I won't have access to those. They run on the pool. So that's the main Lync components. Yes?
The message there, was really giving to say, no, you need to send the message.
Which, sorry?
There, the limited functionality.
Yes.
Was really saying you need to send out that message.
Yeah. I'm saying you ought to have it in your user documentation, your user training. Because otherwise, the first time it happens, a user is going to phone the help desk.
Yeah, but I mean, which is really saying you need to send that now?
The client. The client knows that because the registrar says I can't talk to user services. Okay? So the client knows. But the important thing is your users need to know, otherwise they'll see that and wonder what's going on. As well as the Lync components, though, you need to think about your other infrastructure. Lync isn't an isolated island. We're reliant on Active Directory. What happens if you haven't got Active Directory in your site? Well, if you've done IP phone devices, you must be enabled PIN-auth. If you haven't, you may not have enabled PIN authentication. So if there's no DC in the branch, they can't register with that branch appliance. What about DNS? Is DNS highly available or not? You know, depends on how you're doing your DNS. And it's not just, you've got to think about DNS in terms of your Active Directory domain space and your SIP domain space. Yeah? How's that provided? Because depending on how that's provided as to where that's highly available. DHCP. So if you're using Phone Edition, you know, you're reliant on DHCP, option 120, option 43. How's that being provided? What happens if that disappears? Certificates. Being able to get at the CDP. Certificate distribution point, where the CRLs are. You know, what's providing certificate services? I was just doing an implementation for a customer, and they'd done a pilot pool, they put in their production pool, and suddenly things weren't working. Because they changed the certificate they were using. The new certificate service didn't support auto-enrollment, so suddenly all their phone devices couldn't sign in. Very, very simple, you know. You need to think about this other infrastructure. Network. How much resiliency is there in your network? You know, what are you reliant on? I've got a customer they're about to do a SIP trunk, and they've put all their resiliency in the network. They have 2 network connections to almost every site. They have an odd one in Scotland, which happens to be at the end of a peninsula, and there's no point in putting 2 lines in, because they'll both go to the same BT exchange. Right? They can't get round that single point of failure. They recognise it. Yeah? Recognise that, well, there's no point in us putting loads of extra effort into this, because the reality is, it may or may not, we need to think differently for that site. So think about your network. Think about your PSTN lines. How are they going to fail over? You know, suddenly, people talk about high availability and talk about, I want this, you know, it's got to be always available. Then you start probing into what they've currently got. How does your PSTN fail over today? And a lot of customers say, it doesn't. Yeah? And you think, why am I bothering? Why am I doing this? Duplicating everything is costly, and it doesn't solve all problems. You can over-engineer this. Probe into what's being done today. If they've got a site where they've got PSTN lines coming into opposite ends of the site from 2 different exchanges, you want that to be very highly available. You've got to provide the same network resiliency or branch appliances type setup. Yeah? If they haven't, if they've got a single line coming in to a single cabinet, to a single piece of kit, provide the same level of resiliency. Think about what they're currently doing and how much those things actually really possibly fail, and what would they do today if it failed. You may have seen this wonderful Metropolitan Site Resiliency solution. I try to tell customers not to implement it. I have one customer who's currently looking at implementing it. They are an odd organisation in terms of they meet the sort of criteria I would put on implementing this. It's not the be-all and end-all. Right? It's not going to solve all your disaster recovery problems. We've already said it's not going to solve human error. They're unusual. They're a city police force. No, it's not the Metropolitan Police. But they are a city police force. Right? So their 2 data centres are always going to be in the city. Anything that's likely to take out both data centres is likely to take out all their stuff everywhere. Yeah? So they're not ever going to have a data centre somewhere else. Right? So those data centres are both within the city. They have dark fibre between the 2. They have stretched subnets. And they're recognising that actually for them, voice and conferencing particularly is becoming more and more important. Yeah? And it's the conferencing load that they're particularly wanting to make sure is more resilient. Yeah? Voice, yes, making one-on-one calls, we wouldn't need this. But they're saying, well, actually, no, we want it for conferencing. And so they've defined specific requirements. They know what it's trying to solve. They know what it doesn't solve. And they know in their environment they would never do some of the other things. And then for them, it actually makes sense because they're saying, it's not additional cost to that. I would have a DR site with servers in, right? So it's not additional cost. If you talk to another organisation like Microsoft, well, hold it. We aren't going to have two data centres that close together. We're going to need another data centre somewhere else with kit in. If you work in California where there's earthquakes, you want a data centre somewhere else. Yeah. And therefore it costs a lot of money. So you've got to realise it's additional cost to your DR, in effect. I said in this particular circumstance, it's saying actually it is their DR because it's the only two data centres they'll ever have. So do think about it. It is really getting down to that crunch point in the middle where recovery point and recovery time deployment, and particularly for user services loads. It's about maintaining user services. It's about maintaining conferencing predominantly. Yeah? So just be aware of that. It's there. You can go into it. I'm not going to say much more about it. But it is expensive and it doesn't solve all your problems. So developing a backup plan. How many of you build a house without a plan? No. In fact, I was away the other week and I left instructions for my son to build new decking for me outside in the garden. Being a typical 20-year-old lad, he didn't look at the instructions. Well, that's right. He looked at the pictures and that was it. So when you start developing a plan, I talk about realms of disaster. You need to think about what the individual components are. What would happen if you lost an individual component? Yeah? So think about each component in case. And then look at groups of components. Yeah? Think about, what happens if I lost a whole pool? Yeah? Think about different groups of components. So think through the different disaster scenarios. Think about hardware failure. Think about human error. What happens if somebody's making a change and it goes wrong? What would I do? Think about software failure. You've just applied the monthly patch, and there's something odd about your environment, which means that patch has caused a problem. Yeah? What are you going to do? Malicious. Yes, there are people out there who will do things that they shouldn't, deliberately. You think about that. Natural disasters. So yeah, do think about the floods, the fires, the earthquakes, the power. Think about those and think about, well, what would happen? So think about a flood. Well, I live in the UK and we get those from time to time. They do take out quite wide areas. Yeah? So you need to be aware that how far it extends may knock out more than you think. The reason for doing it this way is you're never going to think about every disaster, because the chances are the one that's going to happen to you is the one you've not thought about. By thinking about components first and then groups of components, the chances are you've thought about all the things you need to cater with almost any disaster that might happen. The reason I put a ship up there, some of you may remember the Zeebrugge ferry disaster many years ago, where they left the bow doors open and there was a great loss of life, unfortunately. They did an analysis of that afterwards. And they do this about a lot of major disasters. And there's a theory going around that there are 7 changes cause a disaster. Lots of little changes add up. So when you're developing your backup plan, your disaster recovery plan, recovering it and testing it is important. There's no good creating a plan today and thinking 2 years' time when you get that disaster it's all going to work. Changes will happen over time. If you aren't regularly testing parts of that recovery plan, you could get to a disaster and it not work. So when we start looking at components, what do we think about? Well, think about what that component provides. So in the case of a front end, it's providing the user registrar service. It's providing conferencing capabilities. There's some web services on there. There's some application services. There might be mediation server running on there. There might be AV conferencing running on there. So think about the different components on your particular environment. Then think about the consequences of that server having a failure. So if I lose a front end, what's going to happen? Well, the user will establish a connection with the other servers in the pool. Yes, it will. It takes time. Right? There's a heartbeat goes between the front-end servers. What will happen is you'll try to connect to a server, it'll say, no, you're actually over on that failed server at the moment, until it knows it's down, at which point it say, oh, we're redistributing that load, I now redirect to the correct front end. If you lose a front end, you've got decreased capacity within the pool. So how have you scaled your pool to cater for the number of users you've got? Web users get redirected to another server. The reach client, if you're using the web app, it could drop the connection and have to reconnect. Conferences will be recreated on the other front ends. Once the front end detects that server's gone down, all the servers effectively come out of the conference and the clients will automatically try and rejoin. The first one that rejoins will re-establish the conference on a new front end. So attendees get momentarily dropped, they will reconnect. Generally, you deploy multiple servers in an enterprise pool, and generally for capacity plan as N+1. You need to think about backup. Additional backup, IIS. How many of you implemented the mobility capability on a Windows 2008 server and had to put the ASP.NET patch on, which includes editing a config file? How many of you have backed up that config file? Very little things, they matter when you come to restore that service. Yeah? It's interesting, I was presenting this in TechEd in North America, and one person came up to me and said, I'm going back to back that up. Yeah? We forget we're relying on other components on the server. So how do I do recovery? Well, one of the first things is to remove the server from load balancing or algorithms, be that DNS load balancing or hardware. You might think, why? Well, if I'm recovering the server, if I'm doing work on that server, last thing I want is it trying to actually satisfy user load while I'm doing the recovery. So take it out. Stop IIS, stop all the Lync services. Because, I said the front ends communicate. If I don't stop the Lync services, the other front end servers will start thinking that server's there. Now, I may be restoring to the same hardware or new hardware. If I'm restoring to the same server hardware, then I may need to re-import certificates, request new ones, run bootstrapper, reapply the topology, restore the service. If I'm going to a new server hardware, it might have a new name. So I've got to edit the topology, take that server out, put a new one in the topology, republish that topology, install Lync, request new certificates, update DNS, and to restore it to normal service, once I've got it all working, put it back in those DNS and hardware load balancing algorithms. Sounds very simple. Think about the steps as you do it. Because if you start thinking about those steps, you start thinking about some things you might need. How many of you back up your certificates? Yeah? Yeah? Sometimes you may not need to. You say, well, actually, I don't care because my certificate authority is always online. I can get another one. Yeah? So it does depend on your certificate authority. Some people have offline certificate authorities. So you need to think about those things. What about director? Director handles user registration. Your SRV records, you generally want to point to a director. People might say, why? Well, that resiliency capability of backup registrar is actually provided by the redirection. Not necessarily by the director, but by redirection. So if I point the SRV record to my home pool for some of my users, there is a chance that that some of those users will hit their front end, and they will never discover their backup registrar. Okay? Just be aware of it. So it's the client's ability to get primary and backup registrar. Generally, that's why you point them at the director. It's also generally the next hop for edge servers. It may be the target for your simple URLs. A lot of organizations where they've got directors, I tend to recommend that they point the meeting URL, etc., at the director, rather than at one of the pool servers. So if the director doesn't go, end users may not be able to authenticate. Loss of server, you've got diminished capability. So again, number of directories you have, how much stuff's coming through the edge. You might lose your federation route. Remote user access. Again, multiple directors help you protect against this. Secondary SRV records. Yeah, you can have secondary SRV records for client sign-in. Yeah. Warning, you can have them. Watch the failover time. Again, you can talk about minutes. Yeah, it takes a time for it to discover that process, because it's trying the first one, it waits for TCP timeouts before it goes on to the next one. Now, having said that, most of your users won't notice that timing, because the Lync client is running in background. Yeah? It will happen in background, generally. Yeah? So it's not generally, but just be aware it does happen. So sometimes if, help desk need to know, because somebody might be saying, oh, it's not signing in properly. They need to know. Just let it wait. You may deploy a secondary set of edge directors and edge servers, secondary SRV records. If you do, think about your firewall rules, think about your alternative federation paths. Again, director has IIS on it. What about the DNS SRV records? One of my customers, I was fortunately not typing at the time. I was implementing Lync 2010, and they had OCS at the time, and they did what they thought was a sensible thing. Their DNS was provided for their main SIP domain space by their firewall product, and it provided different split brains, different outside to inside. So they thought, great, all we need to do is add the A records on the firewall, on the DNS configuration. Unfortunately, it was a fairly old firewall and a very old DNS. As soon as they changed the A records, it wiped out all their SRV records. It was so old, basically the only way to do SRV in the product was to edit the text file. The problem was, that was okay, except if you then ever used the UI, user interface, to change DNS, it wiped out all those edits. Yep, I saw it happen. Sunny, yep, we got them all back. But, what's your backup to DNS? It's your backup to firewall rules. How do you export your firewall rules and back them up? Yep, good. Surprising, it's these little things that matter. Server recovery is very similar. It's the same sort of process. Take them out of the algorithm, rebuild the server, be it on new or new hardware, then put them back. When you look at pool recovery, so I've lost a whole director pool. What am I going to do? Well, if I've got another pool, I may need to go into topology and change my federation route. Yeah, I may need to change DNS, to make sure that actually this is going to be out for a while. I don't want that 2-minute sign-in. I'll flip the SRV records round. Yeah? So initially it's okay. Longer term, until I've got full recovery, I get a better sign-in. If you start changing DNS, you need to start thinking about what's my DNS time to live. Yeah? How's that being provided? And again, if you've got a full pool, you may have to install whatever fixes and then put everything back. What happens if I get an SBA failure? The SBA is only providing user registrar and call routing. It uses local certificates for authentication generally. Users will attempt to connect to their backup registrar. Users will experience a full service because the backup registrar is on the pool. Inbound calls may not be received. As I said, watch your PSTN reroute. If you've got an SBA, it's got a PSTN line, generally. That's receiving some DID numbers. How do they get rerouted or not? So you need to think about that. Outbound calls should be okay, but you've got to make sure you create the right routes. So have users got backup routes in case the SPA is down? So you need to think about your dial plan. Ensure the user logs on a path that allows them to discover their backup registrar. I said they need to go through potentially a director to make sure they get the backup registrar configuration. You need to make sure you configure the dial plan with multiple routes. You may want a list of all users assigned to a particular registrar. May sound a bit odd, I'll show you that in a minute. Because if you start failing things over, you may want to, you need to know who to fail back and things like that. What about your gateway configuration on your SBA? I was inputting one recently for a customer, and of course you go through all this gateway configuration. Who's backing that up? Where's that backed up to? Yeah? DHCP configuration, need to think about that as well. So what do we back up? There is a lovely white paper out there, or a lovely part of the documentation. Configuration. CMS, Central Management Store. So export CS configuration. You also need to export LIS configuration, the Location Information Service. You may think, why? Well, even if you're not using it, if you come to restore Central Management Store, it requires it as an input. So you still need to back it up. IP address as a server. Association certificates. Active Directory. In Active Directory we've got user configuration. From a data point of view, yes, there's a lot of data in SQL. So backing up SQL is good. But what about your file shares? I've talked about that file share. That file share needs to be backed up. User-specific information. Human error is generally not a whole server that's caused, got a problem. How do I recover user-specific information or service-specific information? So, OS backups. Back up the operating system. Yeah, great for complete server recovery. What else do I need? Certificate backups. Where are those? So we need to think about some of these. I'm going to go over to my demo machine. I have a backup script I'm just going to run. Unfortunately, I forgot to put right hosts in it to tell you what it's actually doing most of the time. It's now exporting the configuration. Takes about 2 minutes, maybe less. Backup scripts. What do you put in your backup script? Every backup script is different. Yes, there may be some key things you do the same. And that comes down to there are other things going on in your environment. I said, there's the file share. Who's responsible for backing up the file share? Do you need to do it as part of your script, or is there a general backup service within your environment that's doing that for you? Yeah? That you're relying on. So you need to think about some of those. That's a script you just run. That's a script. You can all read PowerShell. There's lots in there. Testing path, does a thing already exist? So when you start doing scripting, this script can start looking very long. Yeah? Because the scripting is all about lots of other things as well. Here are some of the essential elements. Because otherwise, paging through. A lot of what's in the script is things about testing. File names. Does the file exist? Do I need to delete it before I do the export? Because the export will complain if it already exists. Yeah? When I'm getting certificates, how do I get that certificate? Searching the certificate store to find the certificate. There's some essential elements. This isn't everything. Read the documentation. Export CS configuration. Export LIS configuration. I've got DB import export. Yeah? I'm exporting user configuration and conferencing data. Export of response groups. If you're using response groups, there's a utility in the res kit to back up response groups. I put a robocopy in there. That's just backing up the file share. I just put that in to show you need to back up the file share. Yeah? Robocopy isn't the perfect tool for doing it. I use it for other things, but just showing, it might be NT backup, it might be something else. You need to back up that file share. That may not be in your script. It may be that's part of your general backup service. But you need to be aware that needs to be done. Root print. Particularly on edge servers where you might have static roots. Make sure you back up those extra bits of configuration you've done. IP config. Yeah, I back up the IP config. Just to make sure I know what the IP address is where and everything else if I come to restore that server. I tend to put most stuff in a local directory. So again, things like the configuration backup, the Liz backup and all that, I tend to put them in a local directory. And then I'll copy that down to a file share that I know somebody else is backing up. Now, you may want that copy not just in your main data center, but in your DR data center. You may want it in both places, depending on where you're recovering to, what the nature of the disaster is. Backing up IIS. There's a command to back up IIS. Yeah, you can script that as well. The system I/O is all about writing out certificates. You insert the certificate store and output the certificate. That's roughly what is in a backup script. So I've run my backup, which is all very nice. I'm now going to simulate a disaster. Oh, actually, before I do that, let's just... There's my client. Okay. Yes, I know. Activate Windows, thank you. I'm going to do the sort of thing you would never do in production. I'm just going to kill my front end. Okay? So I've killed my front end. It will take a while for the client to fail over. This is my backup server. So all I'm going to do is run a script. Called move user. I've scripted it. It's easy. It's going to now move all the users. Doesn't quite do everything yet because I haven't put response groups in there. But it's going to move my users over and move my conferences over. Sorry? Do you need a script? No, you can do it manually. I just script it to make it easy. No. No. It won't fail over to a backup. The backup registrar fails over. I'm failing over the users completely. Okay, I want user services failed over. Okay? So this is going to my DR site. So again, if you look at the script has quite a number of things in it. Shall I do it from here rather than going to the slide deck? So first thing I do is create a CSV file. Oh yeah. Yeah, this is a pool failure, not a front-end server failure. I only have one front. If I show you my environment, see that. My environment consists of a domain controller, DC01, a client, CL01. I have a Enterprise Edition server, which is just a single front end, Alice01, with a back-end SQL server, SQL01. And I have a Standard Edition server, Alice SE01, as a disaster recovery site, yeah, for failure. So what I've done is I've killed my pool. I've killed the pool effectively. So what was in that script? So the first thing I did was export the users that are homed on that failed pool. Right? The reason I do that is I don't know what is on my DR pool. Somebody may have failed over some other things. Somebody put some temporary users on there, some test users. Yeah? So I export things to a CSV file, so I know exactly what I'm failing over. The next thing I do is I use that CSV file to drive what I'm doing. Yeah? Just in case I got the coding wrong, right, I use that CSV file to drive what I'm doing. I loop around that CSV file for each user, I move them. It's a force move, right? The reason it's a force move is the pool will recognise the other pool is not there, I can't get at their user data. But I'm going to allow you to fail them over to me, but without any user data. I do the same thing for the conferencing directories. Most people don't understand conferencing directories, they're important for dialing conferencing amongst other things. It's how we find conferences on different pools. I do the same thing, I export that to a CSV, I fail each of those again forcing those. I then import data. I use that backup routine I've done, that file that I've backed up, to import my data. Yeah? Both from a user point of view and a conference point of view. And then I've just done some gets at the end just to show you what happened. Now, I don't know whether it worked or not. I'm going to look now. And I can see it failed. 21 errors. Yeah, 0 resources imported on users, 2 resources imported on home directories. I put it in one script. I wouldn't normally have it as one script. I'd normally have it as 2. There is a delay between you forcing the user move over and all the services on the server being aware of that. So when you come to do the import, if you do it too quickly, the import actually doesn't work. Okay? I normally have it as 2 scripts. I will move the users over, wait a couple of minutes, and then import the data. Right? Just be aware. It's to do with the way CMS works. We're updating things, but all the services don't update immediately. They take a while. They're checking periodically. Just be aware of that. If I now look at Bob, oh, he hasn't got his contact. You notice he's lost all his contacts because that import failed. I actually have another script because I wrote this. I'm just I've actually got import users as a separate script, so if it fails, I can rerun just the import step. And if I look at that, you can see it's importing resources this time, yeah? Imported 7 resources. I'm going to sign, it's easier for me to sign out and sign back in. I'm going to press on. If Bob signed back in, what you'd see is his contact list back. All very good. So that's the script for moving users. What happens if I restore my service? So let's say I've brought my pool back online. Those users are now homed on the backup pool. I need to bring them back to the main pool. I have another script called restore users. That does very similar things. First thing though is uses that export file I created in the first script. That's why you need to know which ones you actually moved over, why you want a list of users. And then it's just moving users back. So I don't need to do the force on the move users, because the pool's there. It will take that data across as it moves them back, right? So I don't need to re-import the data because the move is a normal move user with all the data. Again, I'll do the same with the conferencing directories. So that's the backup script, that's the move user script and essential elements, and that's the restore user script. Can I hold the questions for the last about 2 minutes? I'm almost finished. Just going to wrap up and then we get questions. If you then use the, have they got mic? Read the guide. Yeah? Backup in restoring Lync. A lot of it's in there. We give you this documentation, surprising what people miss. It says in the middle of it, infrastructure information. It reminds you to back up IIS, your load balancing configuration, your DNS. You know, it is in the documentation. If you read the guide step by step, continually test your recovery process. As I said, little changes may mean it doesn't work, you know, suddenly. You know, somebody's moved a file share, somebody's changed the way a backup works. You know, you need to test these things. What I hope you've seen, though, is, you know, high availability is all around keeping a pool or service up and running. Generally, it means N+1. You may want multiple voice routes. Resiliency, that's where the 5-branch appliance come in and the metropolitan site resiliency solution come in. Disaster recovery, it's not about a DR site. It is very much around those backup and restore processes. Think about individual components and think about groups of components. Exports and imports will really help you to give you that lower level of granularity than just backing up the server and backing up the SQL database. Yeah, most of this stuff's on TechEd. That's where the links are. You'll see, you know, recording if you want to come back to it. Don't forget your evaluations. Fill them in online. And we've just got about 2 or 3 minutes for questions. So you had a question? Oh, how the user failover. Right, so the way the user failover works is the user remembers its last signed in server. So it will try that first. If that server's not there, it then goes through the DNS SRV records to find out what the automatic sign-in process is. Yeah? It will try each of those SRV records. So you get the first SRV, depending on whether you're using DNS or hardware load balancing, it will get an IP address, it will try that. Yeah? That will be one of the front ends. Yeah? If that fails, it will try the other SRV record, get an IP address for that, and try one of those. And that's why it takes a while. There's a TCP timeout during those processes. Any other questions? No? I will be in the tech area later on today, if you've got any questions. It is run up. If you want to move to new hardware, it is a new pool, move user. I think there is a documentation about changing the SQL database somewhere. So if you want to move the SQL database, yeah, and you want to change, there is a documentation on how to do just the SQL in an enterprise pool, how to move the SQL server. Okay, and that is a backup restore. It is an outage. It's a backup restore. Yeah. And part of that is because within a SQL server, well, within the SQL databases for a pool, it's very pool specific. Right? There's a lot of cross-referencing of information. So you can't just take this SQL Server's database and put it on this pool over here. Yeah? But there is a lot of pool-specific information in there.
Yeah, I'm not looking at switching pools. I'm just looking at switching backends.
Yeah, so if you want to move the SQL backend to a new SQL Server, there is a documentation on how to do that. Right, thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day.